Welcome to Diablo IV Systems and Features.
Welcome everybody to Diablo IV Systems and Features panel. I hope everybody's here to hear about our systems and features. That is the only deck we have, so that's what you get. All right. My name is Tim Ismay. I am a senior producer on the Diablo IV team. I have a moderate amount of knowledge about all the things we work on, not to worry. I have a collection here of experts that have deep knowledge of all the things that we work on, so they will be talking more than I will. David Kim here is our lead systems designer. Next person down, we have Angela Del Priore. She's our lead UI designer. Next to her is Zaven Hartunian. He is our lead dungeon designer. All the way at the end there is Joe Shelley, lead game designer. Now, we have a ton of stuff to get into, so I'm going to jump right into it and hand this over to David Kim.
Cool, thanks. First, I want to say thank you for coming to our panel. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for all the questions that you've submitted so far. Let's get right into classes. So as you can see up on the screen, these are the three classes we just announced: the Sorceress, the Barbarian, and the Druid. So let's talk a little bit about each of these classes. The Sorceress is the Master of Magic. She is your fragile caster class that deals high magical damage from a distance. So as you can see, there's a good mix of returning skills as well as brand new skills. One of my favorites is this Conduit skill. Whenever you use it, you're invulnerable, you'll deal damage, and you can teleport as much as you want during the duration. I also want to talk about the chill mechanic in Diablo IV. Whenever the Sorceress uses cold magic to attack enemies, she applies chill to the target's hit, making their movement speed slower and slower, and if you apply enough chill, the enemies get frozen completely. So let's check it out in this video. It should be coming up soon. She will be using her Frost, Bolt, and Blizzard skills to chill and then freeze the enemy, as you can see. The Barbarian is one of the main classes that everyone thinks of when they think Diablo, and of course, he's back. If you like constantly jumping around and charging around the battlefield while dealing heavy physical melee attacks, of course, this will be the class of your choice. Again, this is the Barbarian that you know and love, but also he has some brand new things about him as well. One of these things is the Arsenal system. This system allows the Barbarian to equip 4 weapons, 2 two-handed weapons and 2 one-handed weapons, allowing him to use more item affixes than any other class in the game, and also he can equip more legendaries than any other class in Diablo IV. The Druid is a shape-shifting class. The Druid can rapidly shape-shift into his human, werewolf, and werebear forms at a moment's need. So let's check out how that works. So as you can see, whenever you use a werewolf skill, you instantly transform into that form. And whenever you use a werebear form, you instantly transform into that form. When you use your earth or storm spells, you instantly transform back into the druid form. So one of the reasons why I think this is so cool is because you can tie specific mechanics to the moment you transform. So for example, one of the talents, it says something like, whenever you shapeshift into a werebear form, you gain damage reduction for a few seconds. So not only can you pick the specific bonuses that you want, you also control the exact timing when you activate these bonuses. So you have that full control, and that's what I think is so cool about the rapid shapeshifting. Okay, so let's talk about the skill point system as well as the talent tree system. These are 2 different systems that every class in Diablo IV will be utilizing. The goals for these are to have an increased sense of power progression during level up, as well as great player choice and customization. The skill point system is fairly straightforward. As you level up, you'll be gaining 1 or more skill points for you to spend, and you can use it in 2 ways. First is unlocking brand new skills that you didn't have access to before, And second is ranking up existing skills to make them more powerful and unlock new choices within that same skill. Another way you can get skill points in the game is to find the skill point tome items, and then you can use those items to have access to more skill points. For the talent tree, this is an example of the Sorceress's talent tree. Each tree is unique to that class, so this is just one example of one of the classes. So you work your way from top to bottom, making yourself more powerful as you go down the tree. And not only that, you will be able to make very specific playstyle choices to your liking, so you'll have that full customization option. And of course, at the bottom of the tree are the strongest talents in the game. This is one of 6 that the sorcerers can choose from. And it's a fairly simple one, but we have a lot of choices ranging from simple to more complicated playstyles. So this one increases the lightning damage against enemies within melee range. So naturally, this would combo very well with a spell like Charge Bolt, and you can because it is a returning skill in Diablo 4. So let's take a look at the flow of how you go about spending points and unlocking new tiers. So as you can see, this is how the talent tree system works. And this time around, I'm going down the cold tree. So let's take a look at one of the options at the top, or at the bottom. So Endless Winter, so instead of chills leading to freeze, you gain a massive damage bonus instead. So you can kind of imagine, if I'm not going for that freeze playstyle, I can choose something like this to get a different benefit instead. So one last thing I want to mention about classes is there are even more details about skills as well as talents in the demo. So if you're here at BlizzCon, please be sure to check that out if you're interested in that kind of thing. If you're not here, then please check out the streamers streaming live from BlizzCon to learn more about classes. Thank you, and I'll hand it over to Angela for talking about all the cool stuff coming to the open world of Diablo.
Okay, thanks, David. Okay, so you've checked out the classes, maybe looked at their skills and your talents, and you're about to enter the world of Sanctuary again. But one of the biggest differences in Diablo 4 is this idea of a shared and contiguous world. What does that mean in a Diablo game? So to start with, the shared world concept doesn't affect dungeons. Dungeons continue to be private from start to finish, supporting you and optionally up to 3 other players, which is our maximum party size. And what about the campaign then? Because the campaign storyline is, of course, going to send you all around the continent, into these private dungeons, but also to parts of the overworld. So you might think that means your campaign moments in the overworld are now going to be shared with a bunch of random people. But campaign areas will also start as private, meaning accessible only to you and your party, until you've completed the campaign objective for that location. And it's only after that point that it becomes shared like the rest of the open world. So when we talk about shared open worlds, we mean you'll see players outside your party, and you'll see different types of open world activities. Activities like the public events that we showcased in the demo, ranging anywhere from the more common Drowner attacking the coastline, all the way up to a huge pestilence demon is clawing its way out of a farm. The overworld would have things like collectibles, lore books, caches, materials for crafting, as well as dedicated spaces carved out for very specific activities, like open world PvP, or one of the many other open world systems that we're still iterating on and we'll talk about more at a future date. But I'm sure many of you are curious about the other players part, right? How many people are you going to be sharing this open world with? And the number can actually be variable by location, meaning we might make a place less or more populated depending on what's going on there. So our guiding principle on this topic is the feeling we're trying to achieve. And we did try to get this in the demo if you had a chance to play it. But it's that Sanctuary should feel like a bleak and dangerous place. And while you're out in the overworld, on occasion you might run into 1 or 2 other players, but most of the time you're going to be alone. And the exceptions to this would be something like the World Boss event, right? That is a huge undertaking. We want to allow more players into that space so that they can tackle that challenge together. And then there's towns, for the opposite reason. Towns are safe places. They make natural gathering spots for grouping up with your party, trading, or just chatting. And with all of these ways to encounter other players, we want to make sure it's easy to play with them, too. So I'm going to use one of our lead game designers, Jesse, as a way to illustrate what a social player's experience might look like. Jesse would start his campaign, and throughout it, he might jump into someone else's to help them out, or he might invite someone to his to show them something cool or just for company, and there should be no friction there, right? We take the party leader's state in the campaign area, share it with the rest of the party, and everyone will be able to contribute regardless of where they are in their own campaigns. We didn't want people to feel like they were stuck in their own story modes just because they were in a slightly different step from someone that they actually want to play with. We'll have clans, so Jesse will probably form a clan, make a cool clan banner, initiate a lot of different clan activities, because that's the kind of thing that he does in real life. He'd probably use our in-game voice chat to talk to his clanmates while he's out doing side quests, or maybe he switches it to party voice chat because he grouped up with someone that he was doing a public event with, and now they're going to go PvP together. He might even be doing all of this on a console, on the couch with his friend, because, as you've probably heard, alongside PC, we're developing for console, and we'll be supporting 2-player couch co-op on consoles. Yeah. A lot of couch co-op fans, right? OK, but what if you're not the kind of person who likes grouping up with people to get your stuff done? Like me. You could be a really good friend of mine. You could be my spouse. I probably don't want to party up with you. And it's nothing personal. I just like to do things at my own pace. So you can imagine it's a pretty big barrier for me when a multiplayer game gates content or progression behind a grouping requirement, which makes me really happy to say that Diablo 4 does not go in that direction. And all of the best items, content, progression will be available to all players regardless of whether they're playing solo or with a group. And so for me, the campaign is really obvious, right? I love the fact that our campaign areas are going to be private. I'm going to play through that entire thing solo. And I might join a clan, probably not participate in clan activities. I'd be more likely to engage with a clan bank system because I love crafting. But crafting gets boring when you run out of reasons to make items. So being able to donate items to my clanmates really appeals to me. I would opt to use text chat, voice chat, or sorry. I'd opt to use text chat or emotes over voice chat. And I'd still go into the overworld for things like gathering more crafting materials, probably avoid the PvP areas, and target specific events with rewards that I need. But once I'm all geared up, I'm just going to go straight into pushing those endgame dungeons, because that's where I get my private, quiet space back. And so while Diablo 4 does open up Sanctuary to a lot of new shared systems, and hopefully more meaningful connected experiences, the level to which you engage in those connected experiences is still up to you. You could choose to play through the entire game solo, from campaign all the way to endgame, and that would be just as valuable and successful of a way to approach the game as someone who might choose to group up for the large majority of it. So I've mentioned dungeons a few times now, but we've barely scratched the surface on those. So I'm going to hand this over to Zavin, our lead dungeon designer, to go into those details next.
Cool. Thank you, Angela. Hey, BlizzCon. All right, let's talk about the dungeons of Diablo 4. Dungeons are a foundational part of that Diablo series, right? And they're a critical part of that legacy. Randomly generated dungeons are a critical part of that. So Sanctuary is a large and diverse place, and we are filling it with lots of dungeons for you to explore, slay, and loot your way through. So, we want dungeons to be dark, dangerous, unpredictable places in the world. Even the holiest of places can fall to corruption, like the Zakaru Monastery behind me. Now, since they are randomly generated, that means until you venture down that dark corridor, you're not really sure what you're going to find. Could be treasure, could be death. And this is that tension between risk and reward that really defines that dungeon crawling experience in Diablo 4, where anything can happen. And also, dungeons are not always random building, or just like randomly generated buildings. They're randomized exterior environments as well. These exterior dungeons are randomly generated just like the interiors are. So we can have, Whispering Woods here behind me as an example. We want dungeons to feel like real, explorable places in the world. So we also built our dungeon system from the ground up with this idea that we call seamless exploration. So what seamless exploration means is no more loading screens to go down to the second floor. Third floor, 10th floor, whatever, any other area. Yeah. It all happens seamlessly in the game. And with seamless exploration, we can even blend these randomly generated tile sets together. You can go from a randomly generated cave and walk straight into a randomly generated forest. And this means dungeons can become sprawling, interconnected places to explore and discover. Your actions in one part of the dungeon can actually affect what happens in the other part. So, as you're crawling your way through these profane halls, or stepping cautiously through a misty wood, what are you doing? What are you going to do in these dungeons? What can I find? So, well, we have two major pieces of content systems to talk about today. One is random events, and the other is dungeon objectives. So first up, random events are back, and random events are a core part of that classic dungeon crawling feeling in Diablo 4. And one major change compared to the past game is they are no longer restricted to a specific place in the world. This is one of our new events, the Altar of Bishibosh. Any Bishibosh fans out there? I'm not sure. Yeah. So this event can also show up in the Whispering Woods. It's in Garenhold in the demo. You can totally find it. You got a good chance of finding it. And this allows dungeons to actually have a much broader range of possible events. Every time you play, you can actually find a different kind of event in it. And those events can actually follow monsters around, just like elites can, and makes it way more broad range of things to do. So we have random dungeons, and we have random events. But for us, it's also really important that dungeons have this sense of identity. They have something that helps set them all apart from each other. So the other thing, there we go. The other thing we're adding is the dungeon objective. So the dungeon and its objective are designed together as two parts of a cohesive whole. Objectives are completed by doing specific things in the dungeon, like killing a sea witch. And progressing the objective also increases the danger and the rewards found inside that dungeon. So as an example, this is Domhain Tunnels, playable in the demo today. The objective here is to slay all enemies. We've seen that before. But in Domhain, as you make progress in that effort, the enemy responds. They send powerful elites to hunt you down and kill you no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing in that dungeon. Yes, even during a random event. Yes, even during a boss fight. And since every dungeon has its own custom objective, we can have varied gameplay across dungeons as a whole, and memorable dungeons with a strong underlying identity. Now, we're still exploring multiple other dungeon systems and features, but we do have one more thing to talk about today. Let's talk about endgame dungeons in Diablo 4. So, what do we look for in a Diablo endgame? What would we be excited to play? And we started thinking about this, okay, varied content, that's critical. I don't want to just be doing one thing over and over again at endgame. And, making powerful, unique builds is a core part of Diablo, and we need content that helps encourage that level of strategic depth. And honestly, player agency is super important. Random dungeons are awesome, I love them, but I don't want to just feel like I'm just reacting to what the game is giving me. I don't want to feel like I'm on rails. So how are we doing this? We're adding a new type of item called a dungeon key. How do they work? Well, when a key drops in the world, it drops for a very specific dungeon in the world. Using this key, we'll upgrade that dungeon into an endgame dungeon. The key also has a specific difficulty rank. The higher the difficulty, the higher of the quality of the drops that you get within that dungeon. And finally, dungeon keys can roll specific dungeon affixes. Now, this is an entirely new feature. These are modifiers that increase the difficulty and complexity of the dungeons found throughout the game. They apply the affix to either the players, the enemies, the environment, or any or all three of these. So with a system like this, you can imagine an affix that says something like, all enemies are invisible unless they're in combat or something like that. Every time you walk in a room, you're not sure what you're going to find. And you can also have another affix that says there are double bosses in this dungeon. And how having both of those affixes on the same key can have a very different outcome when you're playing any of the dungeons in a game. So, let's look at an example. This is Garenhold, has Lightning Pulse. Let's see what that looks like in the game. So Lightning Pulse adds this cool pillar of lightning energy in stone that hunts down the closest player and deals damage to them. It can't kill it, you can't stun it, you cannot stop it until that dungeon objective is complete. But this is still Garenhold, the same dungeon we have playable in the demo today. It still has the same objective, you still have the same enemies, and you still have access to the same randomized content within it. Yeah. And this is how we get all three of our goals. We get varied content, right? Varied gameplay. Any regular dungeon can become an endgame dungeon by finding a dungeon key for it. And the plan is to have hundreds of dungeons in the game. We get strategic depth. The key provides a lot of information for you to plan a specific build around. You can customize your loadout, your skills, your talent, your items to tackle that specific dungeon. And we also get player agency. You can decide whether you want to use a key and upgrade a dungeon, or if you want to salvage it for crafting. And the plan is to drop lots of keys so you guys actually have exact control over which dungeons are your endgame dungeons. So we learned a lot about dungeons. Let's learn more about the monsters that you kill inside them. And for that, I'm actually going to hand it over to Joe Shelley, lead monster wrangler, really.
Thank you, Zavin. So this is my very close friend, the Fallen Lunatic. I know he's my close friend because he always wants to be really close to me. But the Fallen Lunatic is a really interesting case because he's part of the Fallen family. This idea of families is really important to Diablo 4. In the case of the Fallen, the Lunatic runs forward and tries to explode. The Fallen grunts try to surround the player, while their shaman friends hang out in the back, throwing fireballs and resurrecting slain grunts. Let's take a look at another example of families in Diablo, the skeleton family. The great thing about the skeleton family is that, like the Fallen, the members of the family can work together to do something greater than they could do by themselves. So, of course, you've got skeletons with swords, shields. The shield skeletons can stun you, while two-handed axe skeletons bring down their axe on your head. You've got crossbow skeletons who are firing from the middle distance. And in Diablo 4, you've got my personal favorite, the skeletal ballista. This is an amalgamation of skeletons that have come together to barely hold up this giant bow that can fire from multiple screens away. And we talk about how important legacy is to Diablo 4. This is a great example. The inspiration for the skeletal ballista came from Diablo 2, where you could walk out of a doorway and be surrounded by skeletons and then be getting shot from off-screen by ranged skeletons. It creates this choice moment where, do I stay engaged with the skeletons I'm fighting and try to dodge these arrows, or do I go deeper into danger and lay the smackdown on those skeletal ballistas? In Diablo 4, that gameplay is back. Thank you. But of course, the skeletal ballista is not the most dangerous thing you'll face in Diablo 4. There are also elite monsters. And if you play Diablo 3, there are some monster powers or affixes that are making a return, like Mortar or Frozen. But in Diablo 4, there are a new category of affixes that we call enhancing affixes. These affixes take the monster's base powers and improve on them. In the case of a skeletal ballista, he might have the multi-shot affix. So he's firing 3 ballista shots instead of the usual 1. And the cool thing about enhancing affixes is that when we apply that same multi-shot affix to something like a fallen shaman, he can resurrect multiple grunts or brutes instead of the usual 1, totally changing how the gameplay plays out. Now, of course, there are lots of bosses in Diablo 4. And if we go back to that previous slide with the skeletons, you might see the Tomb Lord standing tall and proud in the middle. The Tomb Lord is a master of necromantic magic and bone, and he can resurrect his skeletal minions, he can create walls of bone and shatter them, and he can spin his magic into a storm of bone that can blind you. But in Diablo 4, you have additional combat options to fight back. One of these is the new evade ability. Every class can do a short distance dash that gets you immediately out of danger and allows you to strike back very quickly and get back in the action. It's perfect for getting out of something like this bone storm. Also, many class skills in Diablo 4 grant the unstoppable status. This status allows you to break out of any control impairing effects. So if you're stunned, blinded, slowed, you can break out of it and grant immunity for the duration of the effect. In the case of our barbarian friend, who just doesn't want to deal with this bone storm anymore, he can rallying cry, becoming unstoppable and granting his allies unstoppable as well, and immediately dish out more pain onto the Tomb Lord. Now, if you've had a chance to play the demo, you may have seen this one, this demon, Ashava. This is our first world boss in the Diablo series. And it is so big that we had to pull the camera out just to frame the action and show everyone engaged with it. Ashava is a huge undertaking, and looking at some of the stats already that have come in, I see that a lot of people have fallen to Ashava. But the really cool thing about the bosses in Diablo 4, and Ashava is a great example of this, is our new stagger system. This means that you can bring your control effects into fights against bosses, like your stuns, your freezes, chills. And when you apply them to bosses, it builds up the stagger bar. When it's filled, the boss becomes staggered, and something really cool happens. I came up with that term myself. But basically what it means is, for each boss that we design, we build some unique behavior. So when you stagger Ashava, you can break off its arm blades. And this changes the whole fight, because those giant sweeping attacks that it performs are greatly reduced in their range. And areas of the battlefield that were dangerous become safer. In fact, if you stagger Ashava multiple times, you can break off both arm blades. And this changes the remainder of the fight. Now, of course, to take on something like Ashava, you're going to need some legendary gear. David's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, so let's take a look first at the item qualities in Diablo 4. So as you can see up on the screen, normal items are the weakest items, and the mythic items are the strongest items that we're proposing for Diablo 4. So let's take a kind of a deeper look at each of these categories. So for the first three categories, normal, magic, and rare, of course, if you played Diablo games in the past, you'll notice that you have more item affixes, the higher the quality. And our main goal for item affixes is to increase the number of playstyle choices and options for players when they're picking item affixes. So, of course, we'll have a good mix of returning affixes as well as brand new ones. For example, attack speed, critical strike chance, critical strike damage, damage against faraway enemies, cooldown reduction, damage resistances, damage bonuses to specific elements, like all this stuff and more. But what I want to talk about on top of that is one of the affixes on the screen. It says +1 rank to Master of Arms on the rare amulet. It's the bottom one that you see. What that's doing is it's giving me +1 rank to one of my talent points. So what that's going to allow me to do is, as I put my talent points and pick a playstyle, I'm not going to have enough choices to go down every single tree. But with items, I can break some of these rules by getting access to talents that I normally couldn't access before, or I can use them to go past my maximum talent point through items as well. So we want to add as many of these types of affixes as possible in Diablo 4. For legendary items and sets, the goal is to provide as much player choice and customization as possible when forming your end-game build. And in order to do that, the most important change in Diablo 4 is to make sure that legendary items are on equal or greater power level compared to set items in Diablo 4. This way, you'll have that full customization of picking every single slot which specific legendary power you want to use. So, So let's take a look at a simple example of customizing your playstyle through one specific simple skill in Diablo 4, as well as items that only modify that specific skill. But of course, we'll have a wide range of legendaries in the game. So this is Teleport. As you can see, pretty straightforward. You teleport to the target location, like you just saw. Say you are struggling on the defense, then you can pick something like this up. Every time I teleport, I gain damage barrier. And this one, whenever I teleport, I create this rift on the ground. Whenever I stand in it, I gain increased critical strike chance. This next one, I can use teleport as much as I want now. It has no cooldown, but it's random, and I need mana to use it. And this last one, I can cast damaging lightning nova whenever I teleport. So let's check that out. So pretty straightforward. Let's try to equip the one that lets me teleport as much as I want. And now I've kind of turned my mobility skill into a damaging skill at the cost of it being a little bit random. And I just want to stress once more that not all legendaries will work so specific to one skill. We'll have a wide range of skills ranging from legendaries that are generic and good for every type of build, legendaries that are good for specific categories of skills, and legendaries such as the ones that you see here. And finally, mythic items are the strongest items in Diablo 4. They're equipped limit 1, but they have 4 legendary powers on them. This is a simple example of a Barbarian legendary, or Barbarian mythic amulet. So you can look forward to more info coming in the future on the mythic items. And there are runes and rune words in Diablo 4. How they work is quite straightforward. You have 2 different types of runes in the game, condition runes and effect runes. You can take any condition rune, combine it with any other effect rune in the game to form a rune word. So the example on the screen is, it says the condition rune, whenever you freeze an enemy, and the effect is reduce a random skill cooldown by 15%. And as you can see from the item, I have formed my rune word. So let me show you some more examples of condition runes and effect runes. One thing that is not displayed here that we're currently working on is we're working on adding progression to runes as well. So you can look forward to more info on that in the future as well. So I'll hand it back to Tim for Q&A, so you can quickly read this before he goes to the next slide.
Thanks, David. Everybody memorize everything? You got it? All right, next slide. OK, Q&A. So over the past 24 hours or so since we announced this game, you guys have been submitting questions. Some of you right here on the floor. There have been places for you to hand in your questions. We've also been looking online. We got Twitter sending us questions, Reddit sending questions. The internet has many questions, as usual. I have taken a list of some of the most asked questions that we got, and now I'm going to ask our panel. So, starting right in, one of the most common ones that we got, a lot of people want to know about monetization or business model or how do I buy this game? So, question of how do I buy Diablo 4? I will divert that one over to Joe Shelley.
Thanks. So, of course, it's very early days here, but what I can confirm is that we will sell a base game and expansions. And I can also confirm that we will not sell power.
I think that's the answer they wanted to hear. OK, on to the next one. All right, lots of questions here we saw from various sources. Customization of my build. People want to know, am I only customizing my build through the legendaries that I choose, or are there other options? That seems like a good question for David Kim.
Yeah, so customization is one of the main biggest goals in Diablo 4. So of course, we'll have more options outside of just legendaries. So for example, I talked a little bit about the skill point system. As you put points into the specific skills, they will unlock brand new things. For example, the Unstoppable that Joe talked about, it doesn't appear from rank 1 of that shout. But as you rank it up, new parts of the skill are unlocked, brand new components are unlocked, as well as the power goes up. So that's one example. On the talent tree side, you can check it out in the demo to get a feel of where we're at currently. But the hope is, even if 2 players are going the same sort of build, say like we're both going a lightning build, then we have enough choices within the talent tree system for us to make our kind of adjustments that cater specifically to me and to the other person, right? And then on the item side, item affixes, we of course want to have even more choices and even more playstyle choices specifically. So we're going to be looking for opportunities to add as much customization as possible across the board.
Awesome. All right, diverse answer. On to the next one. All right, so we got a lot of questions along the lines of, will I be able to solo in this game? But also, will it support a full offline mode? Tricky question. I'm going to send that one to Angela.
So we are not going to support an offline mode, but as I said before, nothing in Diablo 4 is going to require partying up. You can play solo, and dungeons are private, and campaign quest areas will remain private.
Okay. Solo, some amount. Offline, not the case. Next question we had. Okay, we saw a million questions about trading. We have people asking, is there trading? Some people in the audience agree. They want to know, is there trading? They want to know, how is it implemented? How does it work? Is it like D2? Is it like D3? I will send this difficult question to Zavin.
Thank you. So, our underlying philosophy here is we think it's the best when you can kill a monster and get loot that way. So we want to make sure, whatever we do, we kind of respect that part of Diablo. It's core to Diablo. But with that in mind, we also do want to allow trading. So our current strategy is this, and it's still early days, so we really want to hear your feedback on this in particular. So the idea is that we have kind of 3 different types of tradable item, so to speak. So there is a class of item, a bunch of items that can always be traded no matter what freely. I can give it to Angela, she can give it to David, he can give it to Joe, so on and so forth. And then we can also have a class of items that are tradable one time. So I have an item, I use it for a year, and then I'm like, I don't want this item anymore, and I give it to Angela, but now she can't trade it anymore. It's bound to her. So things that can only be traded one time. And then we're also thinking that probably the highest quality, most powerful things in the game, especially in that area, there should be items that you can't trade at all, that you have to earn yourself, that you have to go do those endgame dungeons, kill monsters, etc., get that loot. So, cool. So you can kind of see, just like with these very simple kind of gradient of things and options here, where we kind of do the cutoff of when does something become a one-time trade or a never trade, we have a lot of flexibility there. And we're going to be listening to you guys and kind of getting that feedback as well. So please let us know what you think.
Cool. Complicated answer, but the important part at the tail there, let us know what you think. So if you have opinions on that, make sure they're coming our way. You can yell at us, that's one way, but it's even better if you go online, talk about it. We're going to be reading that. All right, next up. All right, big question around PvP. We mentioned that it's going to be in the game. People are curious, though, what does that do to balance? Are we going to have separate rules for PvP? Is this going to affect the balance of the PvE experience? That is a tricky question. Perfect for David.
Yeah, so we're trying to, it's a great question, I think, because many people must have noticed that we have the same sort of skills, same talents, and same items in both PvP and PvE. So I guess that's the natural question that you would ask, right? But our goal is to have enough choices and options available for players. And what that means, I think, is the best skills, the best talents, and the best items in PvP will be very different from the set of skills, items, and talents in PvE that are the best. So I think, so the current plan is to make sure to locate issues as they arrive and strategically make the right tuning choices to make balance good in both formats, right? So every balance problem is so different, so we'll have to see what the problem is and then fix it that way, but we will have enough tuning knobs across these 3 systems to be able to balance tune properly.
Okay. All right, next big one from the internet. They really wanted to know legendaries. These are important to the game, but has varied a bit across the different Diablos of how they drop. How common are they going to be? Some people even commented, is it going to be like D3, where they basically fall from the sky? Good question. Legendaries, how much are they going to drop? How big are they in my loot? Joe, can you answer that for us?
So legendaries will not rain from the sky in Diablo 4. And when you are playing through Diablo 4 and you're playing harder and harder content, you're going to be getting better and better items. And because of this, we don't think that there's any need, at least currently, to modify the drop rates of legendaries as you get farther and farther into endgame.
Cool. All right. Next one. All right. This is a question about speed of combat. So we've had a few people asking us in various different ways, what is the speed of combat going to be in Diablo 4? Is it going to be as fast-paced as it was in Diablo 3? Are you guys going to try and slow it down a bit? Is it more tactical? Good question. I'm going to send this one to Zavin.
So, for those of you who have played Greater Rifts in Diablo 3, you might know that there's like a timer there. And one of the side effects of doing things like that, and we've learned a lot about this, is it makes you kind of want to rush through, skip things. You start getting very specific about what you want to kill and what you want to do. So for the key dungeon experience, it's the only endgame experience we can talk about right now. But for that in particular, the plan is that since we have all these various dungeons and they all have very different objectives, you need to do a different thing to complete each one of those dungeons. It's going to mean that the pace of combat and the exact thing you're really valuing in every one of those dungeons is going to be very different, particularly when you add dungeon affixes. So, for example, in Domhain Tunnels, it's kill all monsters. Having the lightning pulse chase you through that dungeon, there's constant pressure. You have to kill everything to complete the objective. Comparing that to Garen Hold, where you have to find the fallen idols, you have a bit more leeway. So even just that one affix in 2 different dungeons can yield a very different experience. And on top of that, we have that short distance evade that Joe mentioned. And what that does is it really helps make a lot of the combat very intentional, particularly at higher levels of play. So you have to be very careful, very good at timing your combat and your evade skills when you're doing this stuff. So the plan is to really make it a bit more intentional experience.
Awesome.
I guess one thing to add is it's kind of related to what Joe was talking about of more powerful monsters drop more powerful loot. So naturally, you're going to be wanting to go and take on these really tough challenges, right? But at the same time, we believe that replayability is best when you have a varied play experience like Zavin was talking about. One of the other hooks is we're going to make sure that players at least have some hooks to be able to play different difficulty content in the end game to help with the replayability as well.
All right, so it's going to take a variety of forms, but intentional combats. All right. Next up, there were a number of questions about item randomization. Are we going to have random stats on the items that are dropping, or will each item actually have static stats on it? Said that roughly accurate. Anyway, sending that one over to Angela.
All right, so affixes will be randomized values within a range, which means you aren't just comparing attack and defense on an item. You could have 2 items that contain the same affix effect, but they could have completely different values. And we're also looking into, or we're planning to support modifying, customizing your affixes. We just don't know exactly what form that will take yet.
Oh, cool. All right. Next question up. All right, number of questions around how we're going to support the game once it's live. So people mentioned that they really enjoyed playing Seasons. Other people said they wanted to see more. Questions about, are there going to be major content drops? What is that loop going to look like? So post-game support, Seasons, that kind of stuff. Broad, weird question. David.
Yeah, of course, we're going to have Seasons in Diablo 4. The main goal for Seasons will be to change up the player experience whenever they play from season to season. So we don't have all the details worked out yet in order to achieve that goal, but I want to give you a very kind of slight example for it, right? So if we look at just the legendary item slice, then we can maybe talk about we are planning on introducing brand new legendary items to Seasons. On top of that, we want to kind of spotlight subsets of different legendary items from season to season. So best builds and what you're exploring can change a little bit. So I'm not saying this is the only thing that's going to change up the player experience. Of course, we're going to try to hit it at all different angles across the whole game. But that is our goal, and we'll, of course, have more information to share in the future on the specifics.
All right, we have time for just one more question. I'm going to go to this one because it was heavily asked. Everybody wants to know, will we have hardcore in Diablo 4? Zavin, do we have a hardcore mode?
Of course we're going to have hardcore mode. It wouldn't be a Diablo game without it. You know, hardcore is actually, it was basically invented by the community in Diablo 1. It was officially supported starting in Diablo 2. We're going to carry on that legacy. We're absolutely going to support hardcore mode in Diablo 4.
There you go. Hardcore mode is a yes. All right, that unfortunately is all the time we have, but it doesn't mean you should stop sending us your questions. We have just started the effort of learning how to make a better Diablo 4 game. There's still a lot more game to make. We want to see you posting online, telling us what it is you expect to make this game amazing. We're going to be reading it, and we're going to be responding to it in the future. So thank you, everybody, for coming. If you're here on the floor, you can go play more Diablo 4 right now behind you. If you are watching from home, there are 2 more panels coming up later today. Thank you, everybody.